And we're live. Welcome to another episode of the Geek Book Club, your monthly geek reading repository, joined as always by my lovely bearded co-host, Mr. Andrew Wallace at Fat Produce on Twitter. Happy holidays, bud. We're coming back.
Happy holidays.
This is Boxing Day that we're recording this. So happy Boxing Day.
Happy Boxing Day to you. Yeah, this is how was your holiday?
Oh, it was great. So this was the first year our little daughter Lex, she was really fully aware of the Santa bit. We went to the mall, we visited Santa, we took photos, and she started to click that she could get things. Like she finally understood this process. So she would come up to me and be like, I want a guitar. You're like, well, we can maybe get you one at the store later, but it's going to be Christmas soon. And so let's not get one right now. And she would go, oh, ask Santa for a guitar. And you're like, okay. And so then she goes running up to my wife a couple days later, and she's like, I want a laptop. And my wife goes, no, little girls don't need laptops. And she goes, ask Santa for a laptop. And my wife, like one of the most brilliant parenting moves I think I've I've witnessed yet. She goes, no, Daddy buys laptops, not Santa. And little girls don't need laptops right now.
Oh, that was a good one.
Right off the top of her head, she nailed it. It was excellent.
That's good.
Did you get everything
go ahead.
you wanted for Christmas? You eat some good food?
Oh, absolutely. So I have a great story that we had. So my brother, I have a brother with autism, an older brother with autism, and he'll go and he'll memorize films and whatnot. And we're a huge Star Trek group in my family. Well, I got him the DVD set of the Star Trek the original series, and I had it all wrapped up. He never saw it, and so yesterday during Christmas dinner, he picks up his present with his name on it, and he goes, "My CDs," and then sets it down. And I'm like, "Do you have X-ray vision, Kyle?" Like, yeah. So we had a great Christmas in this household. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, I'm happy to hear it, and happy holidays to you and to everybody who's tuning in. I in the live chat, we already have Ms. Stephanie Carlson and Original Samsung. They're joining us here, and we'll have some chatter going on. But the Geek Book Club is our monthly online book reader club thing where we put out a book, and a month later we talk about it. And so this month's book, the book for December, was Cory Doctorow's Little Brother, 380 pages of young adult novel, sci-fi, anti-authoritarian, bringing down regimes of totalitarianism, spunk and piss and vinegar. I'm not working off a script, so this is going to be another fun, like, casual chat podcast. But so this was my second return. This was my return to the literary stylings of Cory Doctorow. I had previously read Pirate Cinema, which is very similar in tone. Young kids having to face an authoritarian regime with technology and their cunning and their wit and their skill. And this book, I feel, was significantly more successful in conveying the tone of what Cory Doctorow was trying to accomplish. Had you read anything else by Doctorow before we pitched this?
Actually, no. This is my first exposure to Cory Doctorow, and it was really it was fascinating on multiple levels, and it was a really satisfying read. So I'm really excited to get into other of his works too.
Well, and I hadn't really been keeping up with him, and you like, we pointed out, like, oh, I read the wiki, and you're like, oh, I probably should have done at least that much homework, that there's apparently a sequel to this book, and you're like, oh, I maybe should have read that too. But just so that folks can kind of get up to speed with the author that we're talking about, this is from Cory Doctorow's Wikipedia page. Cory Doctorow is a Canadian-British blogger, journalist, and science fiction author who serves as co-editor of the blog Boing Boing. He is an activist in favor of liberalizing copyright laws and a proponent of the Creative Commons organization, using some of their licenses for his books. Some common themes of his work include digital rights management, file sharing, and post-scarcity economics, which makes total sense that the first time I picked up one of his books, it was because he was putting out his own book under a public domain license. So you could download it for free. And I believe, even though we have a link where you can shop for this book, and obviously we're a big, we're always in favor of supporting your local library, I'm pretty sure that you can legally acquire Little Brother under a public domain or a Creative Commons license and read it yourself. Like this is Doctorow is one of those authors who sort of stands by what his protagonists in his books claim to live or stand for. And so this is an author who has been very proud to put out his books for free. And so if you do want to support him as an author, you can buy his stuff, but he wants you to read it regardless.
Oh, absolutely. And I realized that you could get it for free after I got my second overdue notice. So from the library, but yeah, it
just,
was.
Just tell me, send me your library's address, and I'll write them an apology note. And Andrew Wallace was out with tuberculosis, and that's why he couldn't return the book. And love.
Sorry, I had to sanitize the book for you guys.
Right. Page by page.
Yeah.
He is yes. This novel because of the TB. Merry Christmas.
Yes. But boy, this book was written, and one thing that's important, this book was published in 2008.
Yes.
So, and in many ways, well, and I guess, and we should probably get into a little bit of the plot too, but in many ways, it's timeless and current, but also in many ways, it's a product of its time.
Yeah,
as well,
that's definitely what I want to get into. And before we get into
yes.
kind of spoiler territory, because anytime, like, the mark of a good science fiction author is, I mean, there's always that game, like, can you predict the future? Really,
yeah.
Good science fiction is taking the ills of that day and then using some kind of futuristic setting to be able to discuss what's happening in that time. And so Little Brother definitely exists as a commentary to what Doctorow was witnessing of its time. He just happens to also be writing about a somewhat in the near future America, and he gets a lot right as to how near future America was going to be dealing with political issues and with terrorist issues and with security problems. But the things that are of its time definitely stand out as not being what we're dealing with today.
Yes.
So we should probably get in just generally the plot of the book. Centers around a group of high school students and sort of the leader of an ARG team. So there's this very popular alternate reality game that these kids in high school are playing. And the leader of this one little crew of ARGers is a gentleman by the name of Marcus Yallow. And this all takes place in a near future San Francisco. And I don't know, I was getting kind of the impression that because it was published in 2008, that their near future was pretty close to our current day. So
absolutely,
sort of 2012 or 2014 kind of era.
I mean, I figured it was just about current when they were making jokes about how old MySpace was. So
okay, yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, because we can always make jokes at the expense of MySpace. Poor MySpace.
I'll never miss going to a page and having obnoxious music blaring in my headphones that make my eardrums explode. But
it's so great. So this group of kids are ARGers. They're playing this game. They cut class to go and try and solve the next part of this real world puzzle in a very sort of what was the name of that game before? Ingress. So
Ingress. Yeah.
I don't remember what the name of the game is. It's like Haruko-san Fun Walk ARG Sun.
I'm so close in the book here to seeing it, but it'll take
so me. Haruko Fun Madness. Harajuku Fun Madness.
Yeah,
I just
we're
butchered
not Japanese
that,
at all.
but
That was terrible.
yeah.
I apologize for anyone who has a better grasp of.
Sorry, this Ozark boy is terrible with saying other names. So
I mean, I'm the Hispanic kid that can barely speak Spanish, so I'm going to call him Mulligan on that. But they're out there, they're playing this game, and the description of the game is sort of like a little bit I Heart Bees meets Ingress. And they're out there trying to solve these riddles, but they've cut class, and this is a society that is already a step ahead of, I think, where we are in doing things like tracking kids. So schools already have things like cameras that have gait recognition. So Marcus has to describe what he does to defeat these cameras so that they don't alert that one of the kids is trying to, skip school. But while they're out trying to solve this puzzle, a terrorist attack blows up the Bay Bridge in San Francisco. And because he and his team are very close to the actual attack, are very close to the epicenter, and they're all walking around with this high-tech gear trying to solve these puzzles, they get picked up by the Department of Homeland Security and are whisked off to an undisclosed detention facility because they could potentially be combatants. And they're interrogated for about a week, right? It's something like 5 days.
Well, and one big thing too is there. Well, while this attack happens, there's obviously the crowd panic mentality, yes. And the main character's best friend gets injured and stabbed,
right? And
so they flag down the authorities to try and get help, and they get taken away, and they are hooded like terrorists.
Is that they're citizens, and they're trying to get the attention of law enforcement, and by stopping one of the vehicles, that's what triggers this armed response from Homeland Security to whisk them away, that they could be potential combatants.
Absolutely, and so they're taken. What was it? They are hooded and beaten whenever they ask why, what's going on, and taken across water and taken to a facility, and they are taken there for about 6 days, I believe, is what it is. Yeah. And in the process, there is psychological torture, humiliation, including
interrogation techniques.
Yes,
involving and this is sleep deprivation, also like lack of food,
making them urinate themselves.
Yes,
and this is very much like a product of the times, because all I could think of was Abu Ghraib.
Exactly.
During this whole procedure,
very sensitive to the United States role, or how complicit our government was in this type of information extraction. And it's also, I think what the book does brilliantly right from the beginning is the fact that we're focusing in on kids for a young adult novel. The fact that we're focusing in on kids, they have to address things like, after a terrorist attack where thousands of people have been killed because of the collapse of this bridge, their parents wouldn't have known that they had survived. There was no notification. This isn't normal law enforcement. No one called their parents to say, hey, we arrested your kids. This was treated as a direct threat. So they were armed combatants in a potential terrorist situation, which means all of your Miranda rights go out the window.
Oh, yeah.
And they actually do have to address the fact that days later, when Marcus finally capitulates, gives Homeland Security the information that they want, which involves unlocking and unencrypting his cell phone, handing over all of his personal accounts for his email, for his social media. And then there's obviously nothing there because he's not a terrorist.
Right.
Still humiliating him every step of the way, and then saying, well, now that we have all of your information, we can track you and we can do anything we want. And if we see anything we don't like, we're going to pick you up again. Now you can go home 5-6 days later, and then you can't say anything to anybody.
Right.
So and to sign these non-disclosure agreements saying that any violation of the non-disclosure is basically going to be a criminal act.
Oh yeah. Well, and along with it, it's they use their big parts of this are the fact that that the Department of Homeland Security in this use this attack as an excuse to make people disappear on there. Also, like to be able to, like, they can say, well, you can do whatever we want to you because you could just disappear from this attack. Also, the fact that they, as they go along, and it's the whole interrogation is taking place from Marcus's, aka Mikey's. That's his screen name, which is important throughout for his internet identity. They takes place from his point of view, and it's pretty extreme enhanced interrogation techniques. Well, as we go through, and he ends up meeting with his group of friends within the prison, and then after they get out, he was really the only one who was really
abused
and abused, and it's because when they asked him to unlock his phone, he was saying, I want a lawyer.
He initially refused. I'm a citizen.
Yeah, he refused, and it was all out of spite. It was all they put him through this all out of pure spite.
Mm-hmm.
And it just shows the level of desperation and incompetence that of the people who had all the power over him to go through. And
the beginning of this book really read like the fear. I want to use a phrase like fear mongering, but we know that governments have been complicit in these sort of black site programs. So it's not, fear mongering isn't the right word, and I would be making too light of this kind of situation to use that phrase. But it's Boxing Day, and I'm on 3 days worth of tamales. I had a lot of bourbon yesterday. But this to me, the intro to this book was very on the nose of the fears that many people had as regards the United States government in the wake of sort of 2001 9/11 era United States, where there were a lot of jerk reactions. We were all having to like get strip searched in airports.
The Patriot Act.
The Patriot Act getting signed with very few of the actual people signing it actually having read that legislation. And this felt like the commentary on what if these powers got out of control? What if, because, again, we're talking about giving these types of powers over to someone in a TSA uniform. We're not always talking about the most well-meaning individuals or the most honorable or upstanding members of our society.
Or competent.
Well, yeah, I really want to believe that there are people out there that are trying to do a good job.
Oh, absolutely.
They're in an infrastructure and a bureaucracy that that sort of takes the reins of power, especially when we talk about things like officer discretion. Like, oh, nope, there's a rule, no zero tolerance, or 3 strikes and you're out, or this or that. And it absolves them of any kind of decision making. It absolves them of any kind of human decency, and they're allowed to act with impunity because there's a rule, and that's the rule we need to use. This kid refused to open his phone, so now we have a rule that we're allowed to, use enhanced interrogation techniques on him. Like that to me sort of was. There are moments where this book I feel gets a little too soapboxy and it kind of punches you in the nose. And that to me, that initial description of the indignities that he suffered read of the fears of someone from 2007, 2006, cobbling together their thoughts on where this authoritarian regime in the United States could go. And it was wrapped up in a lot of that sort of ACLU scariness.
Well, and after I read some accounts, I was reading some accounts of Gitmo before, like I read a little. So there are a couple of different instances in this book of examples that show these techniques, and I went and read a couple of different accounts of people who suffered through these techniques, and it was basically taken straight from it. And I found, and I mean, gosh, this is some stuff that's still going on. And so like, it does hit it on the nose, but in a lot of ways it needs to be, because people don't want to think about it. People who don't,
I guess, I mean, in the escalation that in that short period of time, and one of the things that I don't think Doctorow has quite gotten right was the application of this type of authoritarianism on United States citizens, being thing that I felt was a little overly escalated. But I guess, you know, maybe part of that isn't necessarily way too off the mark when we look at things like what was that oil pipeline where they were jailing journalists just for taking pictures of it. So we've seen examples, I think, where our law enforcement has gotten a bit out of hand and out of touch with the
and
citizenry that it's supposed to be
not
protecting.
just law enforcement, but also news coverage, which we should get into later, because
yes, that's a great part of the book.
Oh, well, that is a great part, but it's also an unintentionally, almost, I feel like, has become is a more relevant part of this book now than it was then. And
Totally.
it's scary. It's scary as hell. And
it really is. You're absolutely right. That was the most haunting part. But to get to that point, where we go from Marcus being detained and finally being released is after he's finally released and he feels like the sort of the pressure of the situation has finally been lifted, and he takes some time to reflect on what he actually suffered through. It basically emboldens him to start a resistance movement to the occupation of San Francisco by the Department of Homeland Security. And
hack the planet.
Hack the planet, totally. So he starts utilizing his resources because he's a savvy kid. He understands like sort of the basics of like digital security, and he starts trying to activate people through an ad hoc network that he creates through a string of Xboxes, and it's called the XNet. And using various distributions of Linux that they're able to better mask their online activities using, Wi-Fi access points from their neighbors and distributing this information. He starts to build some momentum in fighting what he views are the more reactionary and authoritarian aspects of the Department of Homeland Security's response to this terrorist attack. So things like they're tracking everyone's movement through Easy Pass style tap and pay systems. So your car goes over a bridge and it hits the Easy Pass, and your Easy Pass is automatically deducted from the toll road. And what people don't realize is that these things are being tracked now all over the city. So it's not just the transaction of that, it's that the Department of Homeland Security is aware of every single one of your movements 24/7 whenever they move. So Marcus starts taking RFID scanners and he starts teaching people how to clone them so that all of a sudden people are showing up all over the city in ways that are very unexpected. And the only metric that Homeland Security was using to flag people was unusual movement. But suddenly everyone in the city is starting to look like they've got unusual movement across the city because these kids are out there cloning RFID scanners. And it becomes that debate. The book is firmly from Marcus's perspective, and Cory Doctorow is the voice of Marcus, is firmly on the side of personal liberty, personal freedom. And so I don't think this book does a very good job of handling the freedom versus security debate. You know, the members of our society who might be willing to trade some of their personal liberties for more security. While, of course, I know there are quotes from our founding fathers who would disavow us of that notion.
Yeah, they talk about it directly in this book.
they talk about it directly in the book.
Direct quotes.
Did you feel that the way the counter debate to Marcus's position was framed was intentionally meant to be straw man, or do you think that because Cory Doctorow, I think, has an audience in mind for who he's trying to reach with this book, an impressionable younger adult mind, that he went out of his way to frame the debate from Marcus's perspective that one-sided?
Yeah, I do think that, actually, because if you think about it, there are, at the end of the book, there are two afterwards written. One from a security specialist. Actually, here, let me just pull up on the wiki here. There are two afterwards. One is from someone who's in the industry for security, and they're both basically supporting the Marcus point of view as far as security versus, and it's, yes, they didn't really represent both sides very well. Is basically the Department of It was almost, it was it was just, I felt, and we've discussed this off while we were reading the book separately. It felt like the 90s movie Hackers.
It did. It totally
where
does. Yeah.
It absolutely does, where the bad guys are just the faceless, no, not really faceless, but they're just the demonized
mustache twirling.
Yeah, they're
yeah. There's
yes,
no
mustache
motive.
twirling.
Yeah.
Right. It's a very vague motive, and I mean, it worked as far as the storytelling goes. Social commentary, it worked, but it kind of weakened it a little bit on the social commentary side when you don't represent both sides.
Well, because
when you don't even try to
one
represent
of the missed opportunities of this novel, and I don't mean, I don't think this is a deal breaker by any stretch. I really enjoyed this book. But one of the missed opportunities, I think, is less to do with Homeland Security. I think they were appropriately the vague boogeyman floating over the city. And I think that's the fear that Cory Doctorow is trying to instill in his audience, and I think he perfectly achieves it. You don't know exactly what the threat is. You don't know exactly where it's going to come from. So you would be wise to operate with discretion and try and cover your tracks. But I think the element of the book that, for me, felt the most lacking was the relationship between Marcus and his father, where we get little glimpses of Marcus's father having once been someone who would have likely stood up to authority, who for 5 days, thinking his son had been killed, then became someone who fell in lockstep with this government's response to cracking down on terrorists and having to give up his personal liberties. And we get Marcus's perspective of being really disappointed in his father, but I feel like the book didn't quite help illustrate why Marcus's father had changed his position on some of this stuff. We get one line of dialogue from his mom, like, when he thought you were dead, it wrecked him. It changed him. We just need to wait until he comes back to us. But it felt like a weak way to disclose that when there could have been an actual moment between father and son. We got some great moments between mother and son, but we didn't get that, that realization or the explanation directly from Marcus's father in a way that I felt could have helped move Marcus along. Because really, I think that would have served to even embolden Marcus. Like, I've got to get my dad back, but we just sort of get a vague understanding of that relationship there.
Well, and that's why, and honestly, as I was reading through this book takes place from the first person. It's written in the first person from Marcus's perspective. I honestly think that this book would have been better written from the third person point of view, because they could have addressed that by having maybe a half a chapter or so take place from his father's point of view, and maybe just have a catch up of his personality, of his background, and then bam, set it. And then the rest of the chapter goes on from Marcus and his father's conversation from where they left off a little bit. And it's tough because the first person narrative in this book really enhances the paranoia aspect of this book.
It makes the danger a lot more immediate, but you're right. Absolutely. It leaves some gaps in how you fill in exposition.
Absolutely. And it's very effective for that. But there's always a trade-off, because you lose some of the context from some of the other characters, because he has his big group of friends who's playing this game where they're going out, and when the terrorist attack happens, and then some of the characters just fall off.
Yeah.
And you're like, wait a minute, these are like his closest friends, and they introduce other characters in, and it plays in with that, but it sacrifices.
Did you
insight.
Think so? There's one character, his best friend is madly in love with this young girl. What's her name? Van.
Oh, Van. Yes, and
like, I feel like that was kind of a cop out, because Van has this heart to heart with Marcus at the beginning of the book, saying like, I don't know that I agree with you. I can't go with you. We were taken to, this terrible secret facility, and we were practically tortured. So I'm not going to rock the boat. You can go and have your revolution, but I can't be your friend while you do it. And it felt like that was just a cop out, so that she could just come in on the last day, like the last chapter of the book, to help Marcus out, because she was the last one he could turn to. And it felt like such kind of a, again, I think that kind of storytelling is a little lazy. You know, I just coming from a theater perspective, like I love
Oh.
plays where no character is wasted, because you would have to have an actor backstage ready to be that character. And if you're only going to have them in one scene, then that's kind of a waste. I was actually in a play for a friend where my character only shows up in like the last scene of the play. It was like a 3-act play. And you're like, well, this is very inefficient writing, because any of these other main characters could have fulfilled my role. But I'm here for the whole show, just waiting for my 2 lines at the very end. I mean, no small parts, just small actors. But I mean, damn.
Well,
and I kind of felt like that's what they did to Van.
Oh, and Van was what had so much potential because her parents escaped from North Korea.
Yeah.
And so it's like the absolute nightmare scenario for Marcus is basically North Korea. And they could have used her insight as like, you know, like as a contrast to as like to help provide contrast for Marcus's point of view on what's happening and how he's viewing his enemies versus like what they could even become, to show that something is even could be like to anchor of stuff's bad now. Just think about we have to stop them from becoming
but
dead.
It could be.
Right. And they completely waste her. Then at the end, she's, I always liked you. And it's like, come on, really? So
I've always been madly in love with you, Marcus, because you're an amazing, strapping young man. Now I'm just with tongues.
And then at that point, I was just like, so are the days of our lives.
But again, that was sort of the YA. This is one of those things, like, because it's YA, for some reason you need to have not a love triangle, because along the way Marcus does meet up with another young woman who is extremely tech savvy and becomes a key element in mounting this resistance against the Department of Homeland Security, and they fall for each other. And I think that's actually a really sweet relationship, the way that they described the two meeting. They meet over a ceremony where they're all trading encryption keys with their friends so that they know they can verify communication online, and it's a circle of trust. So if any of them, you know, break the circle, then they're all screwed, essentially.
Yeah.
But you know, so he meets her at this little ceremony, and then they start hanging out more, and you get to learn little things about her and her family and how they get along. And so there's this great, and so I'm reading this book going like, oh, how nice. They're just going to focus on this relationship, and they're not going to do that stupid, like, I'm torn between two potential suitors. But again, at the very end, they bring Van back to go, I've always been so in love with you. And
like, I do like their bonding. You know, it's like, didn't you bond with your wife over dipping a laptop in seawater?
Yeah.
You know,
like, I had sensitive communique that I needed to keep, you know, out of the government's hands. And she was a stage manager in a theater show. And we felt like soaking a laptop in salt water and smashing it with a hammer would be the way to illustrate our undying love for each other.
Oh, you know, it's nothing speaks to it better, you know.
Like you do.
Well, and you know, they're going through this book, there were so many technical details, and you know, and I'm kind of a tech savvy guy, but I am not that tech savvy, you know. When it comes, I couldn't hack anything. I mean, I can figure out how Hangouts works slightly. So
you got your lower third working for this episode.
Yes, so, see, first time in Geek Book Club history. So
damn, you can see his name.
Yeah, I don't have to have a piece of paper now.
Well,
but
so we should probably delve into the tech of a 2008 author talking about, you know, a 2014, 2016 era technology defeat game. And this is one of those things. So like in my family, I forget, one of the afterwards talks about, you know, if you're reading this book and you're really into these things, here are some resources that you can look up. Because what I do for a living is I play the defeatability game. I look at every piece of security and I look at how it can be defeated. And I look about, you know, like, how could I steal something? I don't steal things, but I just I can't stop thinking about what I could do in any given situation. And it really mirrored some of the conversations I've had with my parents and with my brother and my sister, who they're all super into science and games and technology, and we'll play epic board games, like really delving into the nitty gritty of the rules of a new game whenever we get it. And it's all because we're trying to see, like, is there a way that I could exploit one of these rules for my benefit in this game?
Mm-hmm.
Right after 9/11, all of us would have these sort of hushed conversations like, yeah, I was at this airport, and the way that they were doing the scanning, I thought, hey, if you did this, you probably could have gotten this by and through here, and it would have been really easy to defeat TSA if we had done that. And it was because we were all sort of still afraid, some from the shock of that attack, but it was also like, if we can come up with this, and we're just kind of spitballing this, sitting around a dining room table, how much is this is really keeping us safe? And Little Brother does that phenomenal job of discussing security theater, like the illusion of security through these new processes, through these new restrictions, through these new tracking elements. But along the way, the book does, I think, get a lot of the stuff right with how Marcus sets up his resistance network, and then what they do for sort of the low-tech solutions in messing up. Because it's never just like an outright, oh, we hacked the Homeland Security mainframe, and now we've got everybody's personal information, and we can fight them with guns. It's always like a more passive resistance that is
it's more realistic
to people. Yeah, exactly. No, totally.
Yeah. And I love the fact that they set up, and this is me going into like the history side of things. Like with, I love how they talk about how they set up with the Xboxes, and they have what was it the Xbox Universal that they had? Because this is the era of the 360 Xbox 360s. Yeah. So like because the Xbox Universal to me just screamed of the what was it called? The Xbox Essential that didn't even have like a hard drive.
Yeah.
And so like they were giving these out for free because for anyone who's viewing this who is a gamer, and I guess it's retro gamer now, old Xbox, how the original Xbox lost money, they sold them at a loss, and so like they basically followed that through with this Xbox Essential, which they gave out for free to people, and they would load.
The joke was that like the Xbox Universal was Microsoft's attempt at putting the hardware out for free because they were going to make all of their money on the licensing, on the game distribution, and that
pre-loot box.
As soon as those boxes went out, that essentially everybody just like hacked them open and used them to play their own games. They even mentioned MAME, like arcade.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And relation. I was half expecting a plot twist towards the end of all of the Xbox's Red Ring of Deathing, so. Yeah, so
that's what defeats all of the hackers in the end. Is Microsoft.
They all overheat. Yeah, so the last 3 chapters are just them going through the warranty process with Microsoft. But on a serious note, though, it was really interesting because they have what was the XNet, I believe, is what the term for it was, and then like that's how they communicate securely with each other and organize their resistance. At the same time, as you're going through the book, they're talking about how it's getting infiltrated by essentially the Department of Homeland Security and bringing out news and contrary and essentially trying to mold essentially. And that was really telling to me too, because of the environment that we live in today. It feels like that's a more ever-present threat today than it's more in our face today than it was back in 2008. And that to me, like, especially when they introduced the Ring of Trust so that they can verify communication between themselves. And the entire time I'm thinking, like, there isn't actually a very good process for you to know if you're in the middle of some angry Twitter fight that you're actually communicating with another human in earnest and not someone who's just acting as some kind of disruptor. Why is it that our current quantity of social media, they do a terrible job of actually verifying who real people are? I keep thinking about things like financial transactions and, like, I don't know, maybe some sort of blockchain style technology to not fingerprint you, but to verify.
content or to verify interactions might not be the future of our kind of social media communication, because look at how easily gamed all of these systems are by foreign operatives.
The FCC is easily gamed at this with the net neutrality thing and all of these fake.
Be careful, Andrew. We don't want to start getting tinfoil hatty here. I'm just
saying.
listening to us right now.
Oh well, well, I'll just log in my Xbox later. It will be okay. I'll mail you my Paranoid Android, Paranoid Linux distribution.
I'll take a screenshot of my encryption key and then share it on Snapchat, because it'll disappear after it's on Snapchat.
Sure, it'll disappear. Yeah. Oh, but I mean, yeah, it's especially with stuff that's been happening in the last couple of years.
Yeah,
it really shows verification is probably one of our weakest points on a security and societal level right now with the internet. And it is in this book really illustrated to me how combined with everything that's been happening, how massive of a problem this is, and how badly we need to address this today, and how it can very easily lead to freedoms going away quite easily.
Mm-hmm.
And it's scary, to be honest.
Well, and in a way that makes people feel like it's a good thing. I think that is one of the things that
it's insidious.
Why it's insidious, and why I kind of wish that they had been able to expand on the father a little bit more, is because obviously whenever you have people who are afraid, you have someone that you can take advantage of, and I think that would have been a nice counterbalance to Marcus's passion and Marcus's focus in taking them down. But I want to get to the point that you alluded to earlier, because once these kids start actually disrupting the activities of the DHS, it's not that this goes unnoticed, because they have people who have infiltrated the XNet, and you have politicians getting involved. And obviously, San Francisco is still reeling from a terrorist attack. One of the things that's very interesting about this book is the terrorist attack actually isn't important after the attack goes down. Everything post-attack is really about Homeland Security's response, and then Marcus and the XNetters, how they're trying to fight what they feel are overstepping of authority by the Department of Homeland Security. So once it starts being discovered that there are active agents through this Xbox network of XNetters that are disrupting the security checkpoints of the DHS, the media gets involved and starts spinning a narrative where, from Marcus's point of view, he's doing this for very noble causes. But just like you would see on the nightly news, anyone who's disrupting law enforcement is a criminal. They are acting outside the bounds of U.S. law, of state law, and of this new federal protection set up post 9/11, after the Patriot Act.
Well, they had the Patriot Act 2, Part 2 in this, like it's a sequel.
Electric bullets. But
Patriot Act 2, Tokyo Drift.
God. No, wait, it was Too Fast, Too Furious, and then it was Tokyo Drift. So
wait. So it's Patriot Act, Too Secure, Too Furious.
Yes, that's
okay. Terrible joke. I'm sorry.
Too Patriot, Too Act is not a thing. But no, this is what you were getting at too, is because I felt Cory Doctorow really nailed how our media discusses these types of events. Because very often, especially like, you were just bringing up net neutrality, if it's a techie or geekier thing, you almost see news reports that like kind of throw up their hands or shrug their shoulders and say like, well, you don't really care about this, but some people say it's bad, some people say it's good. We don't have an opinion because we know you don't have an opinion. And it was like again, it was kind of perfect talking about this book tonight, because this morning I did Good Day LA on Fox 11, the little local LA Fox affiliate, just talking about, like, hey, what should you do to your phone if you get a new phone? If you got a new phone for Christmas, how should you get rid of the information on your old phone? And I'm sitting there with the anchors on the on this Fox affiliate, and I'm watching all of their eyes like roll into the back of their heads. Like,
Yeah, I saw that.
Less interested. During one of the spots, like the anchor I was working with, she like literally comes out and says like, "Yeah, I don't really get into this kind of stuff." You're like, I just and it's my phone away, and you're like, but it's got your whole life in it, and you're on TV. You should. I know, it's the perfect
It's the perfect illustration of there's an apathy level that's almost accepted. That's when it comes to your own personal security, and like when you're and because it's so
proud that they don't know about.
Right. Well, and it's so intimidating for people, especially like and everyone knows people who like who say family, for example, or friends who have been, say, tech savvy going up to a certain point, and then they're just like, it's just too much, and then it drops off, and then it becomes, it's almost like if you've ever taken a foreign language class in college, and say you get sick for a week, and then you come back and you're just like, it's just too much for me to get back and to catch up again. And it becomes almost a coping mechanism to just ignore and just accept that the ignorance of it, you know, and not, and it's dangerous, because of the fact that you really can't, and so they rely. So the more and more people end up relying on the few who understand it, but then the few who fully understand it might not be in positions of power that can fully.
Or also, I think what we've seen recently, and what I think the book does a very good job of illustrating, is discrediting people who actually do know what they're talking about, or who understand the ramifications of what's going down, so that then you can push forward an agenda. Because later in the book, it's disclosed. We're kind of, let's get into some sort of spoiler light territory.
Okay.
It's later found out in the novel that one of the ex-netters has managed to smuggle out some video of Homeland Security agents talking to politicians, where they're actively using the portrayal of the ex-netters in the media as sort of misguided terrorist sympathizers, these kids who don't understand what they're really getting into, and then the media portrays them as providing comfort to the enemy, and that the Department of Homeland Security is actively pushing this narrative, because then it reinforces why they need to crack down so hard on security, and it's working. That the media is going along with that narrative, is going along with that side of the story, and that it's actually just reinforcing for the citizenry why they should be allowing the Department of Homeland Security to act this way, and at the same time, anyone who's questioning their authority to respond to this terrorist threat is against the United States of America. It's got that George Bush feel. You're either with us or against us. And Doctorow nails that period's kind of crazy. You know, like every time period, excuse me, every time period has its own flavor of crazy. And for us, it was that kind of for us or against us. You're with us or you're against us. And this book, I think, taps back into that. It was almost like a little, you know, what do you call that? A time capsule of
really,
fear and insecurity in that time period.
Well, and another interesting thing too, and it's very much, and I was thinking, oh yeah, this is absolutely a product. Doctorow's point of view, this is absolutely a product of him viewing the Bush presidency.
Yeah.
Well, I won't say necessarily say Bush presidency, but just like
I think it's
right-leaning political. Well, and it's like with other things that are happening now, it's like just right-leaning to like how they was it I'll call it the MacGuffin evidence, for lack of a better term.
Okay.
Where they come up. I guess we're already in the spoiler section.
Yeah, we're in spoilers. We're in spoiler town.
Yeah, they come across the evidence that they have is video of the main antagonist for Marcus personally, which is what was her name from his point of view?
Lady, is that who you're
severe haircut? Yes, severe haircut, and then some higher ups above her who are involved in in politics and in the Department of Homeland Security are talking about San Francisco specifically and how they're basically, oh gosh, I hate using the terminology that they use because it's so hateful.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
and
Where one, like a U.S. senator says, the rest of the country doesn't care about San Francisco because they just think they're a bunch of F words and sodomites. But we can
yes,
use
and it made me uncomfortable.
The rest of the people afraid.
Yeah, and it made me uncomfortable, and that was very much a reaction to the pre-Obama era of war on terror, and it kind of dated it a little bit, but it's also like it was a little hitting the hammer over the head, like over the top almost, because I have a hard time believing that anyone would.
I don't know. I mean, we just went through that race in Alabama with
It's true that that is true.
And then who was it? Let me look it up real quick here. It's the it was a GOP candidate for governor. I'd gladly execute a convicted sodomite, claiming that there should be some sort of return to biblical law. So I don't think he was too far off the mark for the more radicalized elements of the conservative party to be lockstep in that kind of narrative.
Well, and I don't.
That's not a mainstream politics kind of idea.
Right. Absolutely, that's not a mainstream.
We see evidence of those people at the fringes of that side of society, and I think they would be the people who would be more authoritarian in their approach to law enforcement and disaster response and to responding to a terrorist attack. Also kind of falling in for the same kind of commentary on the morals or the values of an area. So that definitely felt like the boing boing editorialist, Cory Doctorow, sneaking that little bit in just to make sure that the audience hated the officials running the DHS.
Yes. One thing
I don't think he was too far off. I don't think he was too far wrong.
One thing I will say, I do feel I got the impression that Marcus's mother is, I got the feeling was almost Cory Doctorow inserting himself in.
Oh, see, and that's why I thought like the relationship.
She's from England originally too, but just
exactly.
like the way.
No, so with him being British Canadian, so I really felt that Marcus so the relationship between Marcus and his mother was Cory Doctorow. That Marcus was Cory Doctorow's sort of youth and passion, what he remembers his life being like as a geeky, probably misfit teenager, and that his mother is sort of Cory Doctorow, the contemporary, the older, the slightly wiser, that kind of that kind of duality. But that's also why I feel it's incomplete, because Cory Doctorow obviously agrees with Marcus and the mother. They are his voice, and that there isn't a counterpart of Cory Doctorow's psyche that could have fit for the dad.
Right. Well, and if this is going to be a commentary on what's happening in the past decade, and if Cory Doctorow's goal is to convert or enlighten, then you have to show the opposite side and show that's like represent it properly, and then show how it's.
I totally agree, but this is also where I feel like that this is maybe the limitation of Doctorow as an author of science fiction, and more the strength of Doctorow as an editorialist is like it doesn't seem to me like he was properly able to imagine the counter arguments to his positions and to have a character really voice those. The character that comes closest is Van, and she disappears for 90% of the book. The second closest is his father, who is just basically a straw man against all of Marcus's fiery, youthful, anti-disestablishmentarianism. And that's about it. I think the next closest person we get who might have a differing perspective from Marcus is the journalist that they turn to try and get help in getting Marcus out of this situation. So once everything has really gone down, all of the poop has really hit the fan, Marcus finally decides that it's time to tell his story, even though it violates the non-disclosure that he signed with the DHS. And he reaches out to a journalist who finally puts his story together, corroborates his evidence, and it's determined that Marcus's friend, who he thought might have died after the bombing and the entrapment, is still alive. And so that story gets published, and then that causes the last act of this book choose really quickly in the final escalation of Marcus versus the DHS. And it's kind of spurred along by his interaction with this journalist. But the journalist stands as sort of not a counter argument, but just sort of a tangent to how good journalism should work in an age of authoritarian messaging. And so she doesn't necessarily disagree with him, but she doesn't also believe him until she has evidence. And so even though the rest of the media has been following lockstep with the DHS, she's a writer for this really independent paper, and she's apparently been heralded as like a civil rights writer, and in the book she's got a reputation for taking down large institutions. And
this is one. Oh, so I'm sorry. Well, this is one section of the book that, in the era of fake news, really makes me wonder if decisive action would have actually happened after this, at this point, because in the era that we live in now, we're already way into spoilers. So in the climax of the novel, they find Marcus and they waterboard him, essentially. And at the end, it turns out the California Highway Patrol come in, local authorities for California come in and rescue him, based off of this editorial, the article that was written. If that happened now, there would be 2 or 3 months or more of debate over whether this is fake news or not.
Oh, is this what we should do? Is this real? I don't know.
Yeah, because there's, with the era of fake news, there's nobody is sure anymore about what's real news.
I think what's interesting is this current political climate that we find ourselves in now, I think it actually has been responsible for some of the best journalism we've seen of the last
they have to step it up
years.
Yet they have to step up their game, because
at the same time, what I think Doctorow missed sight of was an actor in a political role whose main purpose was to disrupt the normal functioning of the agency or the government that he's been put in charge of. And so, even though we might be seeing some great hard-hitting investigative journalism happening right now, but every day there's a new outrage that distracts us from what happened the day before. And I think that's actually a tactic that we really couldn't have conceived of 8 years ago.
Oh, well, and
we couldn't have imagined that information being weaponized. And I think this actually comes to a fun point, are like some of the things that Cory Doctorow got wrong in his depiction of the future, because I think he grossly underestimated social media.
Yes, absolutely. And it comes in because there are new articles coming in about former people who work at Facebook, and talking about how Facebook is basically shredding, and social media in general, not just Facebook. Facebook, it's the biggest social media platform, but like how
Facebook, they're not going to shut us down,
right? Yeah, but like how social media has basically shredded our social
mores. Yeah.
Yes, and how and it's basically we've boiled down to short-term gratification and it's all short-term. It's all short-term, and distractions, and it's hard to, gosh, hindsight's 2020, but it's one of those things that's so insidious and so gradual over a decade that no one really could. I feel like no one really saw it coming, and how this was weaponized.
Well, and I don't even think that the people in charge of it, what they were trying to do was maximize quality time on site, right? So Facebook is designed not to inform, not to show you both sides, not to challenge your assertions. It's designed to reinforce how you already feel about something and to gratify your own sense of self in a way that will keep you on Facebook and consuming things through Facebook. And so that I think is one of the major criticisms, that if you do a Google search for former Facebook executive says social media ripping society apart, you'll get a more nuanced discussion and examination of what we're talking about. Right
I know. I'm very much like just even thinking about it is making my palms sweat right now.
Totally. But
and so,
this is also what they lost sight of, was in creating this system, in creating this framework to only validate the ideas that you already hold as true, so that you're never challenged with an outside idea, and by trying to weaponize information in a way that will keep you locked into using Facebook, it left them completely unprepared for when someone with an actual agenda used their platform against our election, or against an unpopular bill or something like that. Now that social media has been activated to this degree,
right,
it's kind of out of control of the people who actually created these frameworks, these systems.
Well, and also just to be fair, like this can political people from or agents from both sides can take advantage of this now, and it blurs a line of truth and reality.
Yeah, it definitely creates a very concerning element where I think before, when we've had really divisive politics, I feel like previous generations of people had a better understanding of what the problem was, and they just viscerally disagreed on how to deal with the problem. Like, especially looking at like the politics of the 60s and 70s. Like, I think a lot of people would have pointed to social unrest or income inequality or crime statistics and said, these are the problems, but then they would have had visceral disagreements as to how to fix them. Now we live in a political climate where good 20 to 30% of the population just has a completely different idea of what reality is, and we can't even agree on what the problems might be. Climate change, we're still having fake debates about whether or not climate change is a real thing, when that kind of doesn't matter anymore. If you want clean air, you want clean water, you want cleaner neighborhoods, you want a cleaner distribution of energy, you want a better and cheaper distribution of energy, there's no reason not to invest in new methods of energy generation. But you say climate change and everyone flips their wig, and we go down a rabbit hole of whataboutism and science fantasy, and we never actually get to addressing the real problem.
So Cory Doctorow, if you're watching, you've got we have laid the groundwork for you, my friend.
Well, okay, so this is what's hilarious, is that I didn't know. You had to school me on this. I recommended this book, and that you pointed out that there is a sequel. There is a sequel to this book called
Homeland is what it's called. Yes.
Which apparently was also sued by, I think it was Fox. Fox.
Really? I didn't know this.
They have a show called Homeland.
They
produced Homeland, and so it was like sharing the same name. So now I need to read this book and see if
we're able
to retcon. If Cory Doctorow is able to retcon Little Brother to fit into the world of today with mobile devices that are far more capable and a weaponized social media, because that's another thing that I think is sort of charmingly off about his depiction of the future, is just how brutal the smartphone economy has become. Because his description of people using phones in this book, it sounds like most people are still using less expensive feature phones.
Yes, the slider phones. Yes.
Slider phones and keyboards, and he talks about like, well, I had to keep pushing the buttons on this phone to keep the screen so that it wouldn't get locked. And you're like, what about a phone that has like biometric security on it? Like that was only a couple years away, and it seems like you kind of missed where all that would go. It sounds like Marcus's phone is basically just like a fancy flip phone.
Yes, pretty much everyone's is. Well, because wait a minute, what? I'm a terrible IT guy. But like, when did the iPhone originally come out? The first gen iPhone come out?
Well, it was about 10 years ago. So that's exactly
it. Okay.
If he was starting to write this book in that 2006 to 2007 era, you think about like the idea of a smartphone was a very niche business driven economy.
PDAs were still a thing.
PDAs were still a thing. And, his depiction of the Xbox. I mean, we kind of lose sight of like, it was only 10 years ago that consumers had very little interest in picking up a business grade mobile communicating computer phone. And so that really feels like the perspective that this book was written from, that most consumers would just have fancy entertainment feature phones. Not everyone would be walking around with these ridiculous pocket supercomputers that we have today. And I think it's this is one of those things that definitely makes the book feel of its time. And how Cory Doctorow was so right on the pulse with things like media, missed social media because he also just didn't anticipate the iPhone revolution. The consumers getting on board with pocket app driven smartphones.
And I just looked it up. We're in luck. Cory Doctorow has a Twitter. So we really Twitter him. Well, no, not harassing, but just like it's one of the I really think there is a lot of creative material with all that's happened in this last decade. And this is also having me not read Homeland yet, which I really want to read now. But I like it's especially with the stuff that's happened in the last since 2013 even. There's a lot of social commentary and drama and education that can happen that he could bring forward with these characters. I feel like that could entertain and educate.
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. But I will be curious to see, because Homeland was published in 2013.
Yes.
What his take, because Cory Doctorow, so I read Pirate Cinema, which takes place a little further in the future from when it was originally written and is more commentary on copyright and entities like the MPAA. And it's about a team of spunky, tech-savvy video mashup artists that try and take down a totalitarian government in the UK through their ability to remix and mash up video clips and movies. And it's got this very idealistic, like, just one really good piece of mashup art can change the world. And I don't think it's anywhere near as successful a story as Little Brother. Like Little Brother, I think much better illustrates the dangers while also grounding the protagonist's resistance in a way that you feel is at least somewhat remotely possible. Pirate Cinema feels to me more like some sort of more like the Technicolor hackers hack the planet. We can magically win through the power of love and hacking and movie editing. It doesn't work as well for me.
Yeah,
but he does share a bunch of things. Like there's the obligatory scene in Little Brother that also happens in Pirate Cinema, like, well, people throw away so much food. You can just pull things out of the garbage and eat that, and it's not really bad for you.
Yeah.
Like dumpster diving. It's like a major Pirate Cinema. Here it's just a throwaway bit.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say it's in this, and he's like, well, I just won't think about it, whatever. I didn't realize that was kind of a thing in Pirate Cinema in there. And
yeah, in Pirate Cinema, he actually spends a copious amount of time explaining how these characters can survive because they're not making any money on distributing content that they produce, because it's mostly taken from copyrighted sources and remixed. So one of the ways that they're able to just feed themselves are teams of people will go out and run through all the dumpsters around the UK, finding, produce that's only 1 day bad. And oh, if there's a little bit of mold on these strawberries, you can still eat the rest of the strawberries. And like it's explained, like, because there is a culture there. I forget what that's called. It's not dumpster diving, but there's a culture of people who will try and recover food that, it's just produce that looks a little funny, so they throw it out instead of selling it for a reduced price. But because they can't make
yes,
get rid of it. There was a big problem here in California with like Trader Joe's, where they would be locking up these dumpsters, but there wasn't a way for them to donate food to like food banks safely because it was perishable. So state law was getting in the way, but you would have all of this food that was still good, but it was like 1 day past the sell by date, which isn't really a marker of when that food goes bad. So it was just getting thrown out, and a lot of people were really upset about it. And that's changed since. But again, of that time when pirate cinema was being written, that was actually a big concern for a lot of communities. Like, we're throwing away perfectly good food instead of it going to being put to better use.
Well, and for me, I'm from the Midwest, and I'm an Ozark boy, so it's one of those, like, for us, it's a little different, where we have a plan where if everything hits the fan, well, we got a farm to go down to, and we'll just go and hunt, so it's one of those. So it's a little different, but absolutely, like I see, and those are absolutely valid concerns, and it's interesting to see those brought up in these stories. And it's important that they're brought up in these stories, because it's almost like, and as our audiences and people who follow us know, we're huge Star Trek fans, and this type of stuff that's brought up, and you can't see it, but I'm patting on the book right now. These these stories
Best
are
Christmas gift for you ever. Giant.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I'm like, well, in this book here, it's important to bring these up in our media and stuff that we can, and things that we consume, because it's too easy in this society that we live in to just willfully ignore the problems and challenges that we face in the future.
I think it's that constant debate we have as to what type of dystopian future we're going to have. Is it going to resemble something more like 1984, which I feel the threat of Little Brother is probably more in line with an Orwellian style authoritarianism. But I kind of feel like one of the major threats facing our country is the threat of distraction, more of a Brave New World.
Yes, and it's terrifying.
It really is. Well, and we see the downside of people when apathy rules, and when people aren't involved and they don't participate. And then we've seen some recent successes where people actually got off their asses to do something, and wouldn't you know it, situations got a little bit better. And if we were to keep putting some pressure on, like, you might be able to affect some actual change. Perish the thought that people actually invest time, effort, energy, and money into making their own lives better.
Right. And it's all about connecting, the personal connection.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that this book does, that Little Brother does really well. And just, with the datedness of certain aspects and flaws in certain aspects, one thing that this book really hits home and really does fantastically is hitting the personal consequences and personal challenges and personal cost of what's happening, and translating that to, my God, this could really happen to us very, very easily.
Totally. I just thought it was really disappointing that the last chapter of the book is Marcus picking up that portable rail gun and running off with Vanessa Williams to like go shoot like all the bad guys in their limos. And you're like, it just felt so trite. Here was this book that had this, beautifully. Oh wait, no, that was Eraser. Yeah,
I know.
I'm sorry. confused.
Yeah, I know. The whole time, just imagine DeMarcus with this Arnold Schwarzenegger, like, we got to hack the planet, man. Yeah.
Before we wrap all this up, I did want to get one other thing, because there's something that Cory Doctorow does. It's just this beautiful little series of love letters, the beginning of every chapter, where he's writing about a bookstore that was meaningful to him. And I've got the list here. Like, he's got like little mom and pop shops. He's got, mega chains like Barnes and Noble. But one of the ones that stuck out for me, again, from when this book was written to now, how this company exists today, was Amazon. And so when you read the book, because again, he's writing this 2006, 2007, probably. And he's talking about like how amazing you can buy books on the internet. And to now, I wonder what Cory Doctorow of today thinks of the company that puts always listening speakers in your home, and tried this year to sell low cost smart locks so that their delivery people could enter your home to drop off your packages. I feel like if Cory Doctorow were to write a book today doing this, that Amazon probably wouldn't have gotten one of his love letters for how amazing bookstores are in this day and age.
So Cory Doctorow, if you end up seeing this, please.
How do you feel about Amazon now? What do you
please write a third book in the series? And because there's so much potential with this. Yeah. So yes, please.
It's hilarious. I was just reading there going, I don't think he's as big a fan of Amazon today as he was back then.
Well, Amazon, Google, or Facebook, or any of them, because these are real challenges that we face as a society, and how we're going to go forward from this.
I'll be really surprised if over the next year we don't see more activity at the federal level for, like, trade involvement in Google and Facebook, looking at what type of anti-competition or different issues. Because one, it's just I don't think they curry a lot of popularity with the current politicians that are in charge. But two, it's Google, Facebook, Amazon, like the three biggest companies on the planet that traffic and user data and are also used to sort of influence people's behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, well, and gosh, we're in uncharted territory right now with this, because they're pushing out this AI assistant, these AI assistant products, always listening products, that so quickly that people are anxious to just use these features without actually thinking about what the consequences are.
Yeah.
I mean, good gosh, what was it? The Google Home Mini, they had to disable an entire feature to supposedly, fix that, not listening to you 24/7.
Yeah, I loved how that went down too. It was only supposed to work when you tapped it, but then the capacitive touch was broken, and so it was listening all the time. And so Google's solution was, well, we'll just deactivate that feature. We're not going to fix the product. We're not going to fix it. We're just going to cut the feature off. And
I have no confidence that that's actually fixed. So, and it becomes a problem of consumer trust, because you have to on an individual basis examine what the claims are versus what the most likely reality is, because there's no way to know based off of
once you have decided what you think the most likely reality is then see, is there any reputable evidence to judge that assertion by, which again, it's getting increasingly difficult to find something that's not been tainted. But let's wrap this up so we can kind of put in this. I thoroughly enjoyed this book.
Me too.
for some of its issues, and I do feel that there are some there is an issue of balance in this book. What I think is wonderfully achieved, though, is that sense of sort of foreboding and not fear, but anxiousness. Like you're sort of generally anxious as to what's going on with Marcus throughout the entire book. Andrew, do you think that this exists as one of those good all-rounder reads, or do you think that this really should stay firmly more towards the young adult audience? I mean, I know there's like sort of a popular trend right now in grown-ups reading young adult fiction. It's an easy and it's an accessible style of literature for people to get into. But do you think that this book resonates more with older audience members, or do you think that it will have the desired effect? Because obviously Cory Doctorow is trying to plant a little germ, a little seed of an idea in budding young minds. Do you think that it would achieve that for a younger audience?
You know, I'll be honest. Whenever you first, so you first suggested this book, and I'd never really heard of it. And I went into the library, and I was like, where's little? And I went up to the little teller, and asking, where is little brother? Yes, thank you.
Face.
Oh gosh! Oh, I'm so sorry for I'm so sorry for every librarian ever. My apologies.
The clerk.
I'll type in my Twitter apology later.
Calling them stewardesses, aren't you?
Yeah. Don't worry. I'll have my Twitter apology set up here. But
see that you do. See that you do.
But so I went up to the library and was asking, and she said, "Oh, it's the young adult," and that was kind of, But to be honest, and it made, of all of the books that we have read on this channel and through this series, this has spurred more critical thinking for me and examining my own opinions and positions than any other book that we've read so far. And then being a young adult novel, it also just some inside baseball. I had to kind of get through this kind of quickly as we're going through, because it was a pretty busy month for me. So for anyone getting into this, it's a quick read.
Yeah.
And that's a benefit for it, but it doesn't take away. It's one of those few young adult novels that does not take away from the message, drama, or suspense.
Yeah.
At all. And so I would recommend this for anyone, just because it's insightful, and it really can help you reevaluate your own set beliefs on your own security, your own trust in the government and in motivations. And because that's something that we, in this day and age, that we forget. That's good to re-examine our set beliefs, because it's so easy to get super set in our own beliefs.
Totally.
and ignore everything else.
Well, and there's something really sweet about the book too, and why I think it works well for grown-ups, but that I think it could work really well for kids is I look at young people coming up into an era where most of the computers they use are going to be glued shut. I remember disassembling the family 8088 XT DOS computer and my dad soldering stuff on the inside of it. And not you grow up and you're not afraid to take something apart. You grow up like that, and you want to do the brakes on your car. Well, it's a puzzle, and you got to put everything back together again. It's still going to work. It's going to be great. You're not afraid that something's going to go bork. What this book also does really well is sort of empower the reader to consider that there could be alternatives to what corporations have fed you for how you should use the internet, or how you should consume things on the internet, how you could make your own stuff, how you could utilize your own sort of communication standard. Why use Snapchat if you're worried about your privacy, if you could come up with your own limited network of communication just for your friends? Take it off of major services and do it yourself, and that there are resources for you to be able to do these things. That to me is really, I think, the greatest success of this for a young adult audience, not for a grown-up audience, but is empowering them to consider you have all of these tools at your disposal. You don't need to do exactly what these companies say you should do with their products. Cracking them open a little, peeking under the hood, this should be okay, and you should be able to do it.
Well, and the nice thing about this too is, you're talking about how they're targeting the young audience, but this book also, they say don't trust anyone over 25. As someone who's 30 years old for myself, it's one of those things that it shows that you shouldn't be afraid to trust people who necessarily are even younger than you who might understand this and to be it's a universal message. It's the delivery and how you present it that's tough generationally.
Mm-hmm.
And how it's a universal problem and universal issues that we need to address. And if we don't address this universally, then it can become dystopian.
Totally. I agree. So, and that in a nutshell, or in less than 90 minutes, is the dystopian young adult sci-fi classic Little Brother, Cory Doctorow. And now I'm gonna have to pick up Homeland. I'm mad at myself.
I know, me too. I'm gonna have to pick it up too because I want to read it now.
before we jump into next month's book, we did have a message here from a. Let me see if I'm pronouncing this correctly. Was it Stephanie Carlson?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And she had a comment about your slip of the tongue on calling librarians library clerks.
Oh no!
Apparently, your girlfriend used to be a librarian, and she is shaking her head in disgust at you right now.
Well, there's a couch here I can go to, and
I think you're sleeping on the couch, buddy.
Yep.
That's awesome. I love it when she jumps in because it's like I get a little bit more insight into Andrew's personal life. So what we agreed, we already talked about what book we were going to be reading next month. I've already forgotten what it is.
It is The Left Hand of Darkness.
The Left Hand of Darkness.
Yes.
We're going to have a link up for that.
Here, let me pull it up. I unfortunately I left the book. I'm actually with visiting family right now, so I actually left the book at my current place of residence. But it's a science fiction novel about here. It's here. Let me just pull it up.
So this is a novel by Ursula K. Guin.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know her last name. So what I'm stoked is originally published in 1969. And I'm a huge fan of classic older sci-fis, that sort of Star Trek era, OG Star Trek era of science fiction. And so the novel follows the story of Genli I, a native of Terra, who was sent to the planet Gethin as an envoy of the Ecumen, a loose confederation of planets. I'm butchering all of these names. I hope they have phonetic pronunciation guides in this, because this novel is going to mess me up for next month's show. But he is stymied by his lack of understanding of Gethenian culture. Individuals are ambisexual with no fixed sex. Has a strong influence on the culture of the planet, creates a barrier of understanding. So Left Hand was among the first books published in the feminist science fiction genre, of which I was not entirely aware.
Me neither.
That was a decidedly separate genre or subgenre of sci-fi. So that's what we're going to be covering next month. You guys, we'll have links below where you can maybe shop it. But again, we always wholeheartedly recommend that you check out your local library, see if you can pick up a copy, support your local library. And we'll check back in. You can give us a follow on Twitter at The Geek Book Club. And we do finally have a Facebook page and
Instagram as well.
And an Instagram. Sorry, I keep slipping on the Instagram plugs, man. I'm sorry. And if you'd like to chat with us, sort of individually or separately, you can find Andrew on Twitter as @FatProduce, and I, of course, am @SomeGadgetGuy. And that's what we're going to be covering next month. Definitely jump in. We want to thank those people. We had some people throwing some comments throughout the live chat. Some of them were a little snarkier than others, and some of them had language that I couldn't repeat on a show that we're trying to keep somewhat PG. But again, we got that little plug from a little insight as to Andrew and his relationship disaster there. So that was and Juan Salazar has a plug here. Do Disasters Artist by Greg Sestero. at some
Really?
point, please. Let's throw that on the list. We'll see
Yeah,
if we can-
absolutely. I'll write that down here and we'll add it to our list here because that's really fascinating to me. That's come up to me that I've heard of the disaster artist several times. So yeah, absolutely.
So I don't know. Let's powwow. Maybe that'll be our book for February. But the end of January, we're going to be reading The Left Hand of Darkness. So definitely tune back in for that. Want to thank everybody for jumping into this live stream. Hope your holidays have been holly and jolly and grand. You got to spend some good time with family and friends, or at least some good food and good drink, and that you're getting some downtime, some rest, and that you're safe and warm. So we'll catch you guys next month with The Left Hand of Darkness. And thanks for watching and or listening to the Geek Book Club.
Thank you.
Take care.
See you guys. Thank you.